With the mayor, it'll be 4.
Yeah. You know, I like to draft. Yeah, I hope they get on so we can go ahead and proceed, get on and all.
And we are on YouTube, and the mayor has joined us. You have
Howdy, everyone.
Anyone else came on so
Hey,
far?
Mayor.
I'll give them 1 more minute and that's it.
Run
I
to
hope they remembered like I did.
a little reminder.
I tell you. Well, right now it's 4:32.
Okay.
I'll give them another minute. 4:30. Oh, it's 4:33 now, huh?
Who else is on the committee that I'm not remembering?
Gregory, Waring, and Jackson.
Okay. We might have wore them out at the budget committee meeting.
Maybe so.
Councilwoman Jackson is signing on now.
Okay, there she is. Councilwoman Jackson, are you tired?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was at the last of the full council meeting schedule, so I had already deleted that today. I'm sorry.
Okay, I don't see Councilman Waring or Councilmember Gregory yet, but we can go ahead and get started. We have a quorum. So they'll probably catch up on the end.
Councilmember Gregory is signing on now.
Okay. Well, there he is.
I'm here, guys.
All righty. So we can go ahead and get started. Councilman Waring might probably catch up, I guess.
We were on the phone a little while ago. He knows about it.
Okay. Okay, he'll be catching up. He's coming on now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we have it.
All right.
So I'd like to call the Community Development Committee meeting to order. And the first thing we have on here, the time right now is 4:34. And first we're gonna start with the invocation. I'm gonna do this short invocation actually. Let me bow our heads. God, you are our strength. Hold us with your hand in our weakness and teach our hearts to fly with you. There's nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. Hold us tight in your embrace so that we can be stronger than the challenges in our life. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
We'll move on to approval of the minutes. The minutes have been deferred. So we are going to old businesses. We have 2 items under old business. The first one is a request for approval of a resolution certifying property located at 22.5 Mary Street. And the second one, we have an ordinance supporting minimum parking requirements. So we go with number 1 first under old business. Who's going to be explaining that?
Yes, sir. That's me.
Okay.
Council member. This is a request to certify the existing abandoned building at 22.5 Mary Street for income tax credits. So it does not affect the city fiscally at all, or financially at all. We require the applicants for these to provide information that the property complies with the definition of an abandoned building and an abandoned building site under the Act. Here they submitted an affidavit from Mr. Carew, who lives at 24 Mary Street and has for, I believe, 42 years. And they have to show that at least 66% of the building has been non-operational for income producing purposes. And Mr. Carew did certify that in the affidavit. And then they attach their plans for the site. There's an existing building on it that has, I think, 4 dwelling units in it. They're going to add on, and I believe they've received BAR approval. I don't know where they are otherwise in the approval process. Add on to it and then create a dwelling unit in the back, and they'll have 2 dwelling units in the main building plus the expansion, and then they'll have 1 dwelling unit in the back building as a result of what they're doing on the property. And this basically just is us certifying to the Department of Revenue that they're eligible for income tax credits as an abandoned building. DOR has other things it's got to verify, but we don't have any part in that.
Chip, do they have parking on the site also? I have seen it because that's right next to almost to Shaw Center, right?
I believe so. Yes, sir. Yeah, it is right next door.
Right next door.
Let me check the parking. I know it's being raised. The building's being raised up, so I'm going to assume. But let me check here that they're going to put. Yeah, they do have. So, well, I can't share my screen, but they do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parking spaces. It looks like in the back. Well, that's the existing. Let me check the new.
If you need to share your screen, you can. I'll take.
Okay.
At the yellow cinder block building, Councilman Mitchell.
Let me try this.
It's
Is it this one? I think I got the right thing to share.
okay. Chip is checking that because I want to make sure with the parking area.
Yes, sir. So this is the floor plan. You'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, a turnaround 5, 6, 7 parking spaces on the property.
Okay.
So for 3 units. And I don't know if it says, I believe 3 residential units, if I can move this. So 4.5 parking spaces are required and 6 are provided. I don't know. I had 7, but I don't think that counts as a parking spot.
Mm.
So it requires 4.5 and they'll have 6.
Mm-hmm. The only reason I asked that question, because I know with the Shaw Center, I'm working with some people to try to convert that. And again, we're going to be doing some work in there in the Shaw Center. And, Shaw Center don't have any parking space there, actually. And I just want to make sure that even when they build these units and everything, they're going to have ample parking space there. So some parking space will still be left, even if we resurrect the Shaw Center site, in which I'm trying to bring back the Boys and Girls Club back there at Shaw Center, working with the individual there. So I'm going to make sure that all this is going to work in conjunction with one another because, the Boys and Girls Club is a big organization and we need to have that back in this community, which we have lost. And so I'm working with them to do that. And they're going to be doing some work in Shaw Center. As you know of, they're going to be putting the roof on it. They're going to be doing the restrooms in there. They're going to be doing the floors in there. And it's not going to be any big cost to the city. So I'm trying to work with them and trying to even bring back the Boys and Girls Club.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it complies with our parking requirements plus 1.5 spaces. So it'll be 2 per dwelling unit, essentially 2 spaces.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
I'll second.
And I'll second.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. All in favor, vote by saying. Any questions?
Does this have to go? I'm sorry. I had a quick question.
Yes, someone have a question. Councilman Pale, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this have to go to full council for final approval, or is it just at the committee level?
Yes, sir. It's got to be passed by resolution. Or ordinance, but we just do it by resolution.
Yes.
Got it. Thank y'all.
Yeah, we just approving it here, and it's going to full council. Okay. All vote by saying aye.
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 Opposes? The ayes have it. Okay. Secondly, we'll move on down to number 2, the ordinance supporting minimum parking requirements. That's you too, Chip?
No, sir. That one is not mine. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Who's handling it?
Councilmember Mitchell, that would be Mandy Herring or Christopher Morgan from planning. This was on the city's agenda last month when we met.
Correct.
And they have some additional information that they want to share with the committee this evening.
All righty. Whoever's going to.
Great. Thank you, Yana and Councilmember Mitchell. This is Mandy Herring here with the city.
Okay, Mandy. How are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm great.
Okay.
I don't know if Councilmember Appel wanted to say a few quick words about the parking minimum since you had shared lots of great ideas about this first.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Herring. And I'll just kind of give a little bit of an overview and sort of some background as to what we're trying to do here, and then turn it over to Mandy and her team for a more technical discussion of the issue. And they have some very, impressive research that they've developed that they want to share. But really, this effort all arises out of a desire to help address the vacancy problem on King Street. Not just ground level floors, but second and third stories as well. We all know that this is an issue, and frankly, it's an issue that predated COVID. Of course, COVID has exacerbated this issue like it's exacerbated a lot of things, but it shows that there's some work we have to do from a regulatory standpoint to create a ecosystem that is more conducive to not just businesses, but small businesses. So right now, opening a new business or establishing residential use on these second and third stories is tied to minimum parking requirements. These minimum parking requirements, I believe, came into the city zoning ordinance in around the 1960s. A lot of these buildings on King Street predate that by over a century. So what ends up happening in practice is that folks have to, in order to open up a restaurant, in order to activate one of these vacancies, they have to come to the city with parking, either through purchasing, leasing, or exceptions through the Board of Zoning Appeals and other related processes. These are all extremely expensive, unpredictable, time-consuming issues, and it hurts businesses, particularly small businesses. It makes it more difficult for people to live on King Street and to help support businesses on King Street. So what we are trying to do here is something that is not unprecedented. In fact, it is the overwhelming trend, not just nationally, but here in the Southeast, for jurisdictions to remove these parking minimum requirements in their commercial cores to allow the city to develop and to thrive and to help reduce these vacancies and other negative issues that stem from the vacancies on King Street. So what we're trying to do here is cut some red tape, make it easier for businesses to operate, make it easier for people to live on King Street. And we can do it in a way that doesn't adversely impact neighborhoods. The city has a tremendous amount of parking garages. We're in the parking business, guys. There's a lot of different ways that this can work. We've got all kinds of options for people these days with Uber and bikes and pedestrian. I mean, we're not living in a fully auto-dependent world. It doesn't make sense to hold King Street and other parts of our commercial corridor to, as our former director, Mr. Lindsay, remarked, to an outdated relic from the 1960s. It's time that Charleston gets with the times and becomes a dynamic 21st century city when it comes to these issues. So that's an overview of the issue. And I think now it's probably best for Ms. Herring and Mr. Morgan, if they want to share some of their findings from some of the research that they've performed.
Sure,
Thank y'all.
Thanks. Thank you, Councilmember Appel. And I also have Meg Thompson, and Meg is going to share her screen because we have just a few short slides to share with you. I think that's a work in progress, but Councilmember Appel really summed up what I was going to give you a little bit of brief information on. We have been asked to study the parking minimum requirements for the city's central business district. Next slide, Meg, please. And as Councilmember Appel mentioned, and I'm sure you all know this, the zoning ordinance requires a certain number of parking spaces for businesses. For example, a retail shop on King Street will need to provide one parking space for 400 square feet of gross floor area. They provide those parking spaces either by renting a nearby lot or renting spaces in a garage. As long as they're within 400 feet of that business, they have to enter a 10-year long-term lease if they don't have parking on their own property, or they go the variance route. So it's a cumbersome process. We've been dealing with this process for years. We've had lots of variances. We've tried to revisit parking minimums a few times, and maybe we just didn't have the right approach before, but we're back at it again to see if we can help update our parking requirements. Also, we've heard from businesses in the King Street area and other areas that sometimes the parking requirements are prohibitive to them opening a business, or occupying that second or third floor King Street space with a new business or new office because they simply can't meet the parking requirements. And so that's a burden that these businesses have to overcome. We also realize that we have to manage our parking requirements also along with what our neighborhoods need and other livability components. Before I turn it over to Meg, I did just want to remind you in 2018, the end of 2018, early 2019, the City of Charleston Department of Traffic and Transportation did conduct a Charleston comprehensive parking study. Kimley Horn was the consultant on that. And that parking study had several recommendations. It said, improve your parking management, improve your parking technology. It said also revisit your codes, improve your codes, bring your codes up to date, make sure you have right size parking requirements. It also said, specifically review your parking requirements on the peninsula, especially your commercial mixed use districts. It said, think about allowing parking to be further away from the businesses. That works for other cities, even Charleston. It also said, try to, amend your parking requirements so people don't have to go to the variance process. So there's other options. With that, I'll turn it over to Meg, and she can talk briefly about some of the research she and the Business and Neighborhood Services team has done.
Thank you, Mandy. As Mandy was just saying, we've heard from several folks that parking is a concern, especially downtown. It can be hard to come by. So we did some outreach to other cities to see what they do about this. In total, we reached out to about 24 cities, and we heard back from about half of them. Of those 12, about 83% said that they had either eliminated their minimum parking requirements for their downtown area or they had lessened those requirements. So some key themes came out of that research. This is something that's happening in the Southeast. We saw a lot of our neighboring cities have done something about this. And that can look different depending on the city. So for example, some had exceptions for certain uses, like Beaufort, South Carolina. They only require parking in their downtown area for accommodations uses. Everything else, no parking requirement. Savannah, Georgia, last year actually adopted an ordinance that reduced their parking requirements downtown and set up a fee in lieu system where if you still didn't want to meet those reduced parking requirements, you could pay a fee, and that fee would go towards building shared parking and mobility resources. And they actually made this move based on a parking study like the one Mandy just referred to. Also, people have come to this change at different times. Some people have had it for a long time. Columbia has not had parking requirements in their Main Street district for about 50 years. And then if some more recent, so North Charleston in 2016 and 2019 took steps to remove parking requirements in areas where buildings were developed at a time where people built up to the lot line and usually used on-street parking. So this was specifically in the Reynolds Avenue area as well as Park Circle. And with that, I will turn it over to Christopher Morgan.
Wait a minute, before
yes, sir.
I have a question. Go back to the fee in lieu
yes, sir.
portion, please. Thank you. When they say the revenue goes towards shared parking, what does that mean?
So it could go
garages
towards,
or what?
Yeah, it could go towards parking garages, any kind of city parking.
Okay. All right. So I mean, to get additional city parking or to support the existing city parking?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. It was for some new build and then to do some augmenting to their existing parking, so making it more mobility friendly.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Jackson, you had your hands up? Oh, no, okay. Oh.
Councilman Gregory.
Yeah. Councilman Gregory? Okay.
Yeah, Meg, just a couple of questions. In those cities that have the practice, what has been the spillover effect, if any, into adjacent neighborhoods?
That's what I was going to ask.
Sure. So a lot of the cities we talked to, it was a process. There was a lot of community involvement, making sure that people felt comfortable each step of the way. And a lot of education around residential parking programs and making sure that neighborhoods felt protected as this transition was made.
Okay, but
That's-
was there any spillover?
Yeah, that's one question I wanted to ask also pertaining to that, because even on King Street, you know, where not too far from where I live, but you have Leon's and places like that, they are parking all over in the community, like HF and I Street. The people are still complaining. On Ray Street, they're still complaining. And, you know, because they're renting places from different, from the church, if you may, Wallingford Church, if you may, but there's still not enough. So they're parking all in the community, and the people in the community can't park where they live. They have to park distance and watch. Even on Sumter Street, where former Councilman Lewis lived, they have that street filled up and they walk around the corner. So these are the things that I'm kind of thinking about. Even when you get down to further down on King Street across Spring Street, you get into the Elliott-Barry, Cannonbarry area, and you know how they're complaining. And and they'll be calling me pertaining to it, because the people are parking in the community and coming out. So these are the kind of things I'm kind of looking at, even with this new change to be looking at, is you have to get into that community and find what they think about it and take it to them too also. So so they wouldn't come back to the council members and get all beat up by the community before these things are done, because I know what's going to happen. You know, and that's my only problem with it. I know we need to make some changes, but we don't want to make changes and overrun the community. Now they have a problem. Then you have come back to the city with another problem, and then we have to try to deal with that. So we need to get with the communities that's abutting those areas like Elliott-Barry, Cannonbarry, Ratcliffe Borough, you know, and even the those two in particular. And find, you know, how and get them input on it, and so they can give some input back to see what they feel about all this too.
Well, and another key point is where you try to do this. So you don't necessarily want to do this in an area that's directly adjacent to a neighborhood like that. So I think it'll be helpful for Christopher to share his map to show the area that has been suggested as a pilot place to do this.
So council members, can you see this map? Is this map showing up?
Yes.
Okay, great. Can you see my cursor moving around on it?
Yep.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So this is Calhoun Street coming across the peninsula right here.
Correct.
And what we're showing on this map in the light green is the area within a 3-minute walk of our city parking decks. From the parking decks like the Marion Square, the Francis Marion parking deck, to the parking decks the city owns on St. Philip. City owns the property at Wentworth here, the Market Street, the Charleston Place deck here, and a few others around downtown. So you can see how the Middle King area from Calhoun, this is King Street, from Calhoun to Market, is really saturated with parking decks around it and has good access, a 3-minute walk. That means any business in this area is a 3-minute walk from an existing parking deck. Now I just jumped ahead here. I didn't mean to do that, but this is these are the city decks, and some of these other colors here, the dots, are privately owned decks that have parking available at different times of the day, typically evenings, but not always. And then that, if you add those in, which is what we're showing on this next one, the whole area that is within proximity to a parking deck really extends all the way down Market Street and really down the lower parts of King Street to Broad Street as well. The situations Councilmember Mitchell was talking about further up King, those definitely aren't addressed via this type of situation because the parking decks aren't in that area of town.
Okay.
But in this area of town, you definitely have good access to parking decks that generally, as per the parking study that the city had done a few years ago, the decks definitely have some capacity in them. So this was something we wanted everybody to see, is how close all these decks were to these areas that we're talking about.
Okay. So we are talking about mostly from Calhoun Street heading north I mean, heading south on King Street, from Calhoun on south, heading south on King.
Yes, sir. That was the idea, is south of Calhoun and possibly Market Street, possibly. You know, the areas where we know we have really good coverage from parking decks.
All right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilman Waring.
Mr. Morgan, is this being done as an overlay, or I could see where this could work obviously in this area, but
yeah.
I could see if that were to grow, boy, we'd be getting shouts from now on. It's got the infrastructure around with the parking garages, etc., and short walks. I see your point, but how are we doing this to keep away from spot zoning?
We have not delved that deep into it, other than to know that we think we would like to make a simple. I'm getting some feedback.
Yeah.
Is that me? I'm sorry. Other than we'd like to make, you know, an ordinance that would be as simple as possible. I mean, an overlay is an option, but we think there could be options that would not involve necessarily having to create an overlay, because that gets a little bit more complicated. But I didn't know if Mandy or if Mr. McQueenie might want to comment on that question also.
I can comment a little bit on it, and I think Councilmember Appel has already had some thoughts on this too, so I hope I'm not stealing his thunder. I think, you know, we were thinking that we could write an exception into the parking section of the zoning ordinance that would identify, you know, what sections of King Street or which portions of certain streets could be exempt from this requirement. You know, we could start really big, or we could start with more of this pilot project where we know, you know, neighborhoods aren't quite as close to Middle King. You've got more of a buffer with the college there to your west, and then to the east, you know, it's more commercial. So, you know, there are a couple of approaches we could take with that. But I think what we wanted to do today, because you all know zoning ordinances can be complicated or they can be simple. We want them to be simple, those amendments, but they still, even if they're simple amendments, they require time to research and think through and kind of, you know, blow holes into to make sure they work. But like Councilmember Mitchell said too, whatever ordinance we write, we want to make sure we're doing it the right way. So if we need to do some outreach or, you know, just some additional critical thinking about these ordinances, we want to be prepared, because if we put an ordinance forward, we want it to be successful. So all of your feedback right now is very, very helpful. Any questions that you might have will help us do the research we need to do and have something appropriately.
Well, let me follow up. I like the idea of it being targeted, and the reason I say that, suppose it was zoning and people over in Avondale wanted the same type piece over there in the restaurant district, I'm calling it that, or the entertainment district over in Avondale. You know, it doesn't have the infrastructure around with all these parking spots and, you know, within 3 minutes, 3 minutes walking distance. So that's why I can see where this can work in a targeted area. But my goodness, if, you know, 5 years from now, you know, we got a new mayor and a new council, or, you know, 8 years from a new mayor and new council, and this were to grow, I wouldn't want to make it easy without the infrastructure being in place, is what I mean from a zoning perspective.
I think I see Councilman Gregory.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the fee in lieu.
And afterwards, Councilman Jackson. Afterwards.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the fee in lieu, because I do think as the city continues to grow, we'll need more parking facilities. What I'm thinking about is the Rutledge Avenue corridor, okay, which is growing with cafes and small shops, et cetera, of which this probably wouldn't fit without having the infrastructure, as Councilman Waring just said. So I would like, do we have any information on what kind of dollars would be generated from a fee in lieu of?
At this moment, no, we don't have that information. But I think, you know, perhaps
for me, that if we can get some data on that, because I think it does have the potential of increasing the infrastructure for parking. in the city. So it'd be good to have some idea of how the fee in lieu worked in other cities in terms of the amount of revenue generated.
And Councilman Gregory, if I could just add, I think in the situations we're talking about in reference to, encouraging small businesses infilling these buildings on King Street, we aren't talking about a huge number of spaces. The typical variances you see on these are like 4 spaces or 10 spaces or 12 spaces. And if our fee in lieu, I don't know what other cities charge, but I would just imagine it's going to be tough to generate a whole lot with this type of a program here. Now, overall, longer term, if we look at fee in lieu as a partial resolution on some of our parking issues in broader areas of the city, I absolutely think when you're talking about new construction or a complete new project, that is something that can definitely generate a lot of money. But I'm a little bit concerned that in a situation like we're talking about here on King Street, like refilling existing spaces, that we may not generate very much.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate all of this conversation and sharing of ideas. I personally just resonate with the target market that we're trying to serve right now. I think it's a crime. My life with the National Trust for Historic Preservation was all about Main Street, and it was all about making the whole building on a main street, come to life again. So apartments and using all of the stories in these very, unique places of our commercial district. So I don't think we should get ourselves too wrapped up in what we could do into the future, as we know that other neighborhoods like Rutledge Avenue are growing into entertainment districts. I do feel like that would take a whole different kind of focus and a different approach. And yeah, let's try to grab some revenue from people who are just starting out. But if we're really trying to fill the amazingly cohesive buildings on this part of Middle King, as Councilmember Mitchell is talking about it, then let's just do it and make it easy, make it as inexpensive and as attractive and incentivizing as we possibly can, so that each one of those buildings is put to the absolute best use and brings back King Street. I think that we've got the focus right here, include Market. I mean, I like all the little places where you said it's a 3-minute walk to parking, and let's just make that unique and do it and then brag about it and then see what the rest of the city can evolve to be. But I don't think we should try to solve all those problems. We can't imagine that in 8 years, that people will really be changing their mobility lifestyle. I've seen that myself in the places where I've lived, not here. And it happens overnight with the change of a generation who gets out of their cars. So I don't think we should be trying to even think way into the long term, as we see the neighborhoods change in the way that the market and the residents are desire it. Let's do this one right. I join Councilmember Appel in saying, let's just do it, please.
Councilman Waring.
I hear you, Council Lady, but oftentimes we do things without the infrastructure. We build subdivisions, mega subdivisions off of 2-lane highways, and guess what? People buy the houses and then they complain about the traffic. This is a unique opportunity here. I mean, look at the dots here that represent parking garages, both public and private. This is a very unique spot to put a zoning like this on Rutledge Avenue. You're not going to have that infrastructure around them, but one block off of where people live and raise their families. So here, I mean, I support this. It makes total sense. But I wouldn't want this to grow without those dots being around it in other locations. And to go back to how people are getting out of their cars, that doesn't bode well for building additional garages and, for example, off Rutledge Avenue in areas like that, because I think it costs something like $28,000-$29,000 to build one parking space. So it's cost prohibitive to build those things if people are going to be Ubering as opposed to parking in a garage and taking that 3-minute walk to go to the restaurant or the bar or whatever. So that's why I'm cautioning, not so much here, I'm cautioning going in other locations without this infrastructure already being there, because parking garages to support that, as I see it going forward in the future, capital cost is just so much.
Councilman Gregory?
Yeah. Is that area short-term rental?
Some of it.
Some of it's short-term rental. And I agree with Councilman Jackson, but I also think that we've got to be very thoughtful, okay? And not make any decisions in haste. I support it, it looks great, okay? But whatever we do is going to be precedent setting. And others will be asking to do the same thing without even the infrastructure in place. So I think it's very important for us to be very thoughtful with regard to this matter. And if there's short-term rental there in any of these areas, that in and of itself has the potential of also having some parking implications. So I think it's very important for us just to be very thoughtful and think this through. I support it. I don't want you to think I don't support it. It's just that I want us to be very thoughtful, okay, before we make the decision.
Yeah, and I support that area too when they're talking about south of Calhoun Street, because even with the committee, you know, with the Central Business District Committee, we were talking about the same area all the time. And that area, I know they have a lot of parking garages and parking places in that particular area that if we can get the people to go to, there's a lot of parking garages in that particular area. Now, the only thing I'm alluding to is we got to be careful when we talking about this zoning that particular area. I remember one time, couple of times on council way back when we tried to do something like that in zone one area and didn't zone the other area, the Justice Department came in and stopped us. So we have to look at it very carefully how we do it and how we're going to write it up and how it's going to be implemented that particular way, because the Justice Department jump on you quick. Someone come back and complain and say that, oh, they spot zoning in the city of Charleston. Then that's what happened a couple of years ago on council. And so, but I support that particular area there because I know there's a lot of parking in that particular area. It's not even being utilized. Garages, right, not being utilized like it should. So if we can get those particular businesses to use those garages and the people to use those garages, and it could make sense. But now we have to get them to use it. And it's still not parking like they are parking now. If they utilize it, that's going to be another thing we're going to have to try to push to that point also. But,
well, Councilman, that's one reason I brought up the overlay piece, you know, to try to stay away from what you just said, you know, spot zoning aspect of it. And I know spot zoning is a bad name for anybody in the planning business. Mandy will be the first one to say, and Mr. Morgan, I know that. So that's why, I mean, if you tied the district to a certain amount of garages and, like you say, 3-minute, in this case, 3-minute walking distance before you can go and create another one, definitely don't want to create one without repeating, but that infrastructure being in place. But I think this is great in this area right here.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's the way you're going to write it up, I believe. I don't know. I'm not in that part of it, you know.
Councilman Mitchell, can I ask a question?
Our pay grade.
Councilman Peter?
Yes. So I hate to go back to sort of the beginning part of this discussion, but Councilmember Pell brought up a couple of points, and I think maybe Mandy emphasized this a little bit. So my question is, what was the thought process back when we had these requirements of having X number of parking spaces per square footage? What was the idea behind doing that? What was the city trying to accomplish in that?
And why is it different?
Can anybody answer that for me?
Well, I think maybe Christopher and I can try that. I think that's just what cities and zoning ordinances did in the 60s. Right. Automobile was king, so let's make space for autos. So that's just been the way that America has thought for so long. And I think just now, not just now, but in the last couple of decades, when people are realizing that main streets were dying and they were trying to figure out how to revitalize Main Street and how to use multiple stories and buildings in these beautiful main streets or small main streets or walkable main streets, that's when, you know, I think cities started to analyze their parking codes and parking requirements.
And the reason I asked that question is because, you know, there was never, to my understanding, someone please correct me on this, aside from the overflow problem that Councilmember Mitchell and others have brought up, of folks parking in residential neighborhoods and people's backyards, essentially. The other component of all this is that there is no logical nexus between this ordinance and what the public policy was to accomplish. And that's sort of a misnomer with all of this. We had these requirements and it is a burden because I've represented property owners in the past who were trying to get these variances, and you had to come through this twister mentality to figure out how to maneuver through that ordinance to get your property approved for that particular restaurant or retail establishment. And I'm looking at an old picture hanging in my office of the corner of Wentworth and King Street, surrounded by residential areas. And that's how Charleston was created. I mean, it was created with this diverse mixture of residential and commercial quarters within streets of one another. And so the cities passed these ordinances of these parking requirements that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And now we're concerned about, obviously, which all are concerned about, which has been the overflow of cars coming down and parking in people's private areas. But you've got to have some kind of connection between what we're trying to accomplish with this old ordinance. So the map that Mr. Morgan brought up, I think is a good starting point for all of this. And I certainly would support trying this out on a pilot program to see how this works out. Because I think it gives you the balance that you're looking for or not infringing on people's residences. But I think historically you need to look at how Charleston really was formed and how these buildings were constructed. They weren't constructed with these parking requirements in there in the first place. Right. And now we're trying to put this square peg in a round hole situation for the past 40 something years. And it's been a, excuse me, my French, but it's been a pain in the ass. It really has been. And I don't think it's accomplished what we're trying to accomplish. So let's get the roll. Let's see what happens.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman?
The mayor, the mayor, and I'll go with Councilman Gregory and then Councilman Appel afterwards.
I think there's pretty good consensus. This is the beginnings of a good idea, but needs a little more development. And in the interest of time, could I recommend we ask staff to work on this a little more and figure out exactly how they would recommend we would proceed with it, be it a overlay district or a zoning amendment or whatever. And maybe, I think the closest of examples to us would be Savannah. And I'm very interested in the fee in lieu, but I must say right now, addressing the issue of vacancy on King Street, I don't want to make this super expensive on anybody. We want this to be an incentive to fill those spaces right now. But long term, if we keep something like this, the fee in lieu is attractive, I think, to us. So anyway, I'd like for them to continue to work on this and bring something back to us.
Okay, but since the mayor said we can defer this, and this happens to come back to the.
I don't think there was anything but discussion on this matter this evening. We weren't taking a vote, were we, Ross?
I think if it was passed.
No, I don't think so. And I agree with everything the mayor just said. And frankly, I agree with almost everything everybody has said tonight. What I do think, though, is that at this point, this has been before the CD committee twice. I do think that at this point, I think staff has enough direction to start working on some ordinances, engaging with the community. And at this point, I think we need to go ahead and take it, through the normal zoning process where staff develops an ordinance, takes it to the planning commission, work it through that process. Because really, I think we've done our job here at the CD committee. We've provided the concept, the very good feedback from all the different perspectives. But, part of what is also going on here is we've got a struggling commercial corridor today, and we need to not recklessly, but work with determination on moving this thing forward. So I don't think we need to vote on anything. I think we can just simply, by acclamation or consent, just direct staff to get to work on doing what they do best, which is developing these very innovative and progressive ideas to help us move forward.
But wouldn't this have to be approved by us to send to the full council to send to the planning commission?
I don't think so, because there's dozens of zoning ordinances that go on a planning commission agenda every month that never see the CD committee, and I think that this has already received more overview from this committee than most zoning changes that happen. I'm not trying to throw any shade on the CD committee. We're doing great work here. If this becomes a reality, it's because of the work that was done in this committee. But under our statutes, the planning and zoning process is run through the staff, the planning commission. Then of course we get to see it at council, and we have the opportunity to further engage in that process. I just want to get this thing moving. But maybe we can have another pit stop at the CD committee, as we're moving through staff and the planning commission sort of on a concurrent parallel track. I mean, I'm not against that. I just want to see this thing start to move. That's all.
Okay, I'll go with Councilman Gregory and Councilman Jackson. Then we're going to just kind of let this go for right now.
Yeah, I'm in support, but I also think that if we can be very creative in our thinking as we develop the ordinance, many of these places have living spaces over them.
It has to come.
I'm not mistaken. Most, if not all of them, are vacant because of the parking, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
It would be great, however, if somehow we can link some of those possibilities to affordability and use the affordability nexus, okay, as an incentive at a minimum to do something. But I'm just saying, if somehow, as we develop the ordinance, if somehow we can do the link, and there are lots of units, okay, above many of these commercial spaces. And to me, it's just insane that they're not rented in order for us to create a living and a vibrant downtown.
Right, correct.
But if somehow we can link, how creative you can be, some part or some portion, okay, of those many units to be affordable, I think it would go a long way for us to reach our goal.
Councilwoman Jackson?
Well, I just wanted to talk about a procedural thing. I agree with Councilmember Appel. I think that our committee here has done its work in support of this as more than just a concept. I mean, we've agreed on the location and the methodology, whether it be an overlay or some sort of exception to the parking code. So if in the goal to move this to the full council and the planning commission as a zoning ordinance, should we actually take a vote this evening to that we are recommending that it go to to be drafted for first reading? Do we need to be on record about that? I'm asking Mr. McQueenie or Ms. Herring or whoever.
We don't have anything.
Councilman Gregory, you had something to say?
No, I'm saying I don't think we have anything for first reading yet. We don't have an ordinance. We don't have anything. We have the concept, and I think we're all agreeing on the concept.
Right.
And I think that what we need now is some type of recommendations from staff as to how that ordinance would be structured. And then this committee reviews the ordinance, and then the ordinance goes to the full council.
That's the way it's supposed to.
This is just a concept discussion.
Mr. McQueenie?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think I can work with Mandy and Meg and Christopher and Councilmember Rappel, whoever else wants to be involved on, drafting ordinance fairly quickly and getting it before you to review.
Right.
Seems, fairly simple, different ways you can go, but we can come up with a recommendation.
Okay, my recommendation is that we'll give this chip to staff to draft an ordinance and bring it back to the Community Development Committee, and then we can send it on. Councilman Waring?
Listen, it's procedural. I think the suggestion Councilman Appel came up with, try to move it along on a dual path. I agree with that, but I definitely agree with you that it should come back, and Councilman Gray come back to this Community Development Committee, and I'll tell you why. We're trying to create communities above these retail aspects. So we're not going to bring the final version back to the committee that reports up to council. I think we need to do that, but we can do it in a dual process to save on time. So,
okay.
By the time it gets to council, hopefully we'll have all our questions answered.
Okay, if they don't have anyone else have any other questions, we can move right on. We'll ask staff to bring that back to us, and we'll have a meeting as soon as we can to keep this moving on.
Yes, sir.
All right, so we'll move right along to new business. And on the new business, we have round 3. I think that the CARE strategy for use of funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I think that would be Ms. Johnson.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Councilmember Mitchell and members of the CD Committee of City Council. What I am bringing before you tonight is basically a request supporting what we have outlined as a proposed action based on funding. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has indicated they will award to the city to provide additional assistance to those folks adversely impacted by COVID-19 and the pandemic that our country is experiencing right now. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is awarding the city an additional $1,145,752. And again, the purpose behind that is to positively impact those families and individuals that are experiencing difficulties as a result of the pandemic, but consequently job loss of small businesses, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing quite an increase in the number of evictions in our community. And basically this funding is there to help buffer these individuals and families from the experience of that. As you all know, previously, the city was awarded slightly over $600,000, both in CDBG, what they call CV CARES Act funding, as well as housing opportunities for persons with AIDS funding. What I would like us to do, or what I've proposed for the city of Charleston with your approval and council's approval, is utilizing this funding differently to ensure longer term sustainability for those families that are now being adversely impacted. And I have it outlined in the memo that is before you, is utilize a portion of these dollars to acquire land to build housing for those persons that are both homeless and those that are at risk of becoming homeless as a result of the pandemic, and then use a balance of those funds to go towards the same expenses that we're helping families with now, which is providing rent, mortgage, and utility assistance for low and moderate income persons. We have 3 years to spend this money. Typically, we spend our money a lot faster than the time allotted, but that is the time frame. And I mentioned that because if we're looking at acquiring, it also gives us time to ensure that whatever we acquired, it has the appropriate building constructed on it, so it actually meets the intended need. Along with approving this funding, of course, we are also required to do an amendment to our 5-year consolidated plan. And so I am asking your approval of those 2 things this evening. And I'll take any questions, council member.
Anyone have any questions? I'm going to vote for approval for it.
Second.
Well, you can't make a motion. You can't make a motion. You're chairing. I make the motion.
I'll make everything.
Approval.
I'll make everything. I'll second it.
Pull out Robert Rules of Order on you, man.
You can put that in the back. The rules of order go in the back right now. Anyone have any questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 Opposes? Maybe we'll move right along. Okay, number 2, we have discussion. Councilman,
growth boundary.
Councilman Waring, you got me going on this one.
All right.
Memory of understanding an urban growth boundaries. Who's going to explain that? Chip?
Christopher and Mr. McQueenie, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'll start with a little bit of background here. I think this was begun, and Jennifer, if I could start the, thank you. I'm going to go to my maps here again. To this one. Let's see, let me click on this and then I can. So, of course, this image in front of you right here is, the entire city and our kind of planning area. This is an image from our new comprehensive plan, some images there, and it shows the existing urban growth boundary around all parts of the city as it exists today. And I think this had generated from folks on Johns Island in reference to the interest in a memorandum of understanding between the city of Charleston and Charleston County to make sure that it's rare and almost not a very common thing for the urban growth boundary to be moved, in particular on Johns Island. And so I believe Mr. McQueenie has drafted a potential ordinance. Of course, a big player in all this would need to be Charleston County, which I don't think at present has addressed this. And I don't think Councilman Brady is on the committee meeting tonight. So I'm going to kind of keep going on this a little bit, but other folks, please chime in if you want. I was just going to focus a little bit on Johns Island real quickly about the urban growth boundary there. Of course, with Johns Island, the urban growth boundary is shown in this image in green, and we've got the vast majority of Johns Island is outside the urban growth boundary. The vast majority of areas outside the urban growth boundary are county. So if it were going to move, since the city doesn't really annex outside the urban growth boundary anymore, if it were going to move, it would be a county issue of moving it, because the things that are in the city are generally inside it. So again, pointing out the importance of the county being part of it. Just a couple other things. This just shows the urban growth boundary a little bit tighter in. Back in 2007, those of you, I think some of you were on our council back in 2007 when we had the Long Savannah issue. And at that time, the city adopted criteria for moving an urban growth boundary, and they were made a part of the comprehensive plan. And there's a whole range of them. I know the picture images are on top of them on this slide here, but basically the urban growth boundary, for it to be able to move, you have to meet all this criteria and show that the housing that's inside the urban growth boundary, it does not have enough potential for expansion. So you'd have to have a pretty detailed study of that. It creates a lot of criteria that would make it very, very difficult for somebody to move the urban growth boundary. And these are essentially still in effect today. These were actually done for the Long Savannah development. And of course, it met the criteria in large part because it was creating a permanent edge on the outside of the urban growth boundary out there, which was the Long Savannah, or the park that the County Park and Recreation Commission created. And I'm going to show you an image on that. This is just some of our applications that we have that people have to answer these questions about moving the urban growth boundary. The urban growth boundary, of course, was addressed in the Johns Island Community Plan in 2007. And again, recommendation for reinforcement of, keeping it where it is. It was also addressed in the city's preservation plan in 2008, keeping it and strengthening it. It was referenced in the Century 5 plan, our current comprehensive plan, and you see it here. And of course, during this plan, we adopted an urban growth boundary out here in the Cainhoy Peninsula, with the Francis Marion Forest being the permanent green edge in the outside area of that. And then in Plan West Ashland 2018, it was discussed again, and the need to strengthen, and the fact that here, this is Long Savannah, all this was made permanently green, permanently publicly owned land that made this a permanent edge to the urban growth boundary here. And I think that ends up being the main objective of a lot of folks who'd like to see some sort of MOU. And with that segue, I might go to Mr. McQueenie and let him talk about what he has, drafted up in reference to an MOU that could be utilized for urban growth boundary.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Sorry to break in after Mr. Morgan, but I know that Councilmember Brady is not on. I don't think he was able to break away from his day job. And if I could just speak a little bit to the focus of this and why we are proposing that the city will adopt an ordinance. I would just like to give the CD committee a little background on that. I've been having the pleasure of sitting in at the Johns Island Task Force, actually since Mr. Brady was elected to the council, because there wasn't any representation from a Sea Island district member. So I've learned a lot about the goals of the preservationists, the conservationists, the current residents of Johns Island in particular, but I also can really relate it to the things that I'm perpetually concerned about on James Island in terms of future development opportunities and what's still remaining farmland on the south part of James Island. So I've learned a lot on that basis. I think really the intent of this for the city is to go first with making something that would be a much more permanent document than strictly the sort of gentleman's agreement that we've had historically with the county, and in the hopes that the county would appreciate that we're willing to make that move of making this an ordinance as opposed to literally just a memorialized, but still a handshake agreement, as opposed to, we've seen some violations of the UGB in recent years. And that's concerning everybody who cares about the welfare of the open space and the longstanding agricultural areas of Johns and James Island. So I just wanted to put that plug in on behalf of Councilmember Brady.
Councilmember Waring?
Where's the impetus for this coming from? I mean, I'm not necessarily for or against. I mean, who's wanting this done?
Mostly it's the Johns Island community that Councilmember Brady represents.
So, Mr. McQueenie, and us doing whatever we're about to do, is it going to bring some sort of congruency with the differences in our urban growth boundary line and the county line, the county's urban growth boundary line?
I believe on Johns Island, and correct me, tell me if I'm wrong, that we do have an agreement on it, where the boundary is. I was looking at my notes, and somebody had sent me a template in February of this year, and I had prepared a draft MOU with the county in February of this year that kind of goes through and says this is the urban growth boundary. If either party, before any party will violate, the requirements of the outside the urban growth boundary, they'll require an urban growth boundary impact application, and they'll submit certain things, and whether it's city or county, it really just aligns the future use of those areas, both comprehensive plan wise and zoning ordinance wise, in the city and the county, so that, a lot of times, I won't say bad development, but a lot of times rural areas get rapidly urbanized because there's a competition between jurisdictions, usually cities, over land that somebody owns that wants to develop. So it's, they can go back and forth if you've got contiguity. I think here the idea is that the county and the city would be, on the same page with everything. I did check the map when I looked at this the first time, and I think there's a very small area on Johns Island within the town of Hollywood, and of course there's, Rockville's contiguous to Johns Island, or contiguous to something that's contiguous to Johns Island. So there are other municipalities that don't seem to have a any desire to, you know, take out a huge part of rural Johns Island. But those, you know, best case scenario, you'd have all municipalities on board, because you just never know when somebody wants to become the next big municipality. But really the two players are the county and the city right now.
Right. Yeah, right. This has been so successful over the years. I don't know that the city has ever violated the urban growth boundary line. And same thing with the county. And the problem is when you, as you illustrated, I'll name one, obviously North Charleston. They don't recognize the urban growth boundary line, and they, you know, seeking to, in my opinion, violate it by jumping up there above Magnolia and Middleton Gardens up there. So I'm sitting here thinking, well, this thing has worked great between the city and the county. Why are we? That's why I wanted to know the impetus for doing this.
Yeah, I think it's just to formalize an agreement so that, you know, everybody has something in writing with the understanding of what we're going to do, as opposed to leaving it each jurisdiction to put in their comprehensive plan or zoning ordinance what they're going to do, and be able to change it without consulting with the other jurisdiction. I think that's the main point.
Yeah,
And
I thought in addition to the entities you spoke about, I think you even have to get some sort of permission from the Council of Government to violate this line. So,
and yeah, I believe it's built into the MOA, and this was a template somebody sent me that I made a little bit larger and put some more language into. But the parties to the ones I drafted are the county, the city, BCD-COG, St. John's Water, CWS. So all, not only the municipalities, but the utilities that potentially would serve there. And it's just what it says it is, it's a memorandum of understanding that nobody's going to overdevelop this area without, you know, consultation, at least with the other jurisdictions, or following a process.
So,
Councilman Gregory?
Yeah, because I think it's a little more than just a gentleman's agreement. Okay.
Well, it is.
There's much more, and I think, and to describe it that way, I think it's not quite appropriate.
I didn't say that. I wasn't saying that.
No, I know you did.
Oh, okay.
Councilman Jackson described it that way.
Yeah, we voted on that.
We've been on this for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm with Councilman Waring. I'm just not sure, other than you just want to formalize it, make it an ordinance instead of an MOU. Is that what we're trying to do here?
I believe it was an MOU for Johns Island, and I don't know is there a pre-existing MOU for Johns Island? Because if so, no, you know, I don't know if that was important. But
Can Christopher lend any additional insight?
Well, again, this was something that came out of the Johns Island Task Force, and Mr. Brady and Ms. Jackson serve on that, and they had wanted to get a strengthening of the relationship between the city and county on the UGB and make it tougher for changes to be made. That's my understanding on it.
Mr. Chairman, I actually think a full explanation of what's actually in place needs to be given to Councilman Brady and Councilwoman Jackson. I don't think some of the things Mr. McQueenie just said, having to get permission from CWS, St. John's Water Commission, Council of Governments, obviously the county, the city. I'm telling you, man, you're talking about heavy lifting to go and develop on the outside of this thing. How long, Mr. Morgan, has this been in place? Coming close to 20 years?
Yes, it was first originated in the late 90s, so a little bit more than 20 years. Yes, sir.
All right, and it hadn't been violated in all that time, one time that I can think of, man. But so anyway, we respect it. Just to show you, I forget the name of that. Mr. Morgan, help me out. Out in the Ravenel area, it was a big old subdivision of about 400 houses. That Poplar Grove, that was the name of it. Poplar Grove.
Yes, sir.
Wanted to violate the urban growth boundary line, and those are, would have been 400 or more. I don't know, $500,000 houses or more, and Mayor Rowley wouldn't do it. Okay, CWS. Well, anyway, the county wouldn't do it, so they ended up doing something with Dorchester, but it's not as big as it would have been had we run water and sewer out there with from the city of Charleston. So there's great respect for what we have in place right now. I think they would do better to have an orientation on what's actually in place. But anyway, and even the Johns Island Water, whatever commission that they own out there, Councilman Brady and Jackson, I don't think this thing is much more than a gentleman's agreement. All I can tell you, it's a lot of gentlemen and gentlewomen involved in this one. So,
yeah, I know we worked on this a long time. There was a lot of fight to get this approved. We worked on this thing a lot since I've been on council with this urban book boundary from Johns Island. I think some of the people, some of my colleagues was getting tired hearing me saying about how long my family was living on Johns Island. This was going through a long time, you know, and so I don't believe we don't want to get into a fight. Nothing with the county to lose that relationship we have with this. So I think all the entities involved, I think they need to have another meeting with them and probably trying to work this thing out, because we don't want to cause any problems, what I'm saying.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, if I could just weigh in, and I apologize after I make my remarks, and I have a commitment to be somewhere.
We'll be closing down too.
6 o'clock. But of course, I have spoken with Councilmember Brady about this matter recently, and he certainly is an advocate for it. But the first person that came to me about it was one of the members of the Johns Island Task Force. Most of you know Mike McShane. He's very responsible, and that group is very thoughtful. So I think they seek just further assurance of everyone's intentions. I must concur to an extent that this might be looking to fix a problem that doesn't exist, you know, and it might be more of a feel-good thing. I know as mayor, I feel like I would do the same thing you just described, Councilmember Waring, that Mayor Riley did. I've pledged personally that to honor the urban growth boundary, and I hadn't had the opportunity now in 5 years to even have to make that decision. So it doesn't seem like some compelling problem, to be honest with you. But I do believe, for whatever reason, the members of this responsible group feels like this course would give them some further assurance and be a good policy statement. So that's what it is, in my view. You know, for us to move forward would show some leadership to the county. The other approach would just be make sure that the other partners, you know, are hand in hand with us before we take the step.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I hear you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree with all of that. But if we're going to do it, I don't think we do it unilaterally. Let's call the other stakeholders and have them poke their head in the huddle too, because I mean, the Council of Governments, St. John's Water Commission, CWS. There's some other ones you call, Mr. McQueenie, but I think the reason this worked so well is because we had that confluence of agreement with those various stakeholders. I don't think if we're going to change something, I don't want to remotely insult those allies.
Yeah, and I kind of reading the agreement because it has been a while for me. But the substantive provisions really are that it creates so if the city receives an urban growth impact application, what's called that would impact the urban growth boundary, it would have to ask county council to review it and make a recommendation on it that would not be binding on the city. And then the city and the county would do the same thing. If it had an urban growth boundary impact project, it would send it to the city council to look at it, to review it, and to issue a report with it both within 60 days And if they don't act within 60 days, it's considered recommended. So that's pretty much the substantive part of the proposed agreement. But I don't know the history as well as everyone does. I mean, it looks like it's in both of our comprehensive plans. It's just there's no agreement, you know, in writing between the two of us. It's more of a it's in both of our zoning ordinances, but there's nothing that gives the county the right to weigh in on city zoning ordinances impacting the urban growth boundary or vice versa.
So what's your will and pleasure on this?
Well, if y'all want, listen, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a, you know, if you want to review something, and if the people out at John Island Group, invite Ron Mitchum and his folk out there. You know, get the people from St. John's Water Commission and CPW. And it may come up with, we may have an Achilles tendon out there, but we all would look at it at the same time and prayerfully move in the same direction at the same time. The part about the city moving without the others, I think would be a mistake. And I think the request, I wasn't at the meetings, but I think I don't know that the people at that meeting maybe had as much information that's been discussed in this meeting, all the stakeholders involved in that thing that really, listen, you can't develop if you can't get water and sewer. One of the most busiest corridors in the state of South Carolina is I-25, I-26 and I-95. There's not even a McDonald's there, okay? You know why? There's no water and sewage. So they got big roads, but no water and sewage. So if CPW doesn't participate, the city doesn't participate, the county doesn't participate, St. John's Island Water Commission doesn't participate, it's going to be pretty hard to develop on Johns Island without water and sewage. So they have a lot of protection. Now, I'm not saying what was done 20, 25 years ago can't be built upon. The part about moving unilaterally, I think, is a mistake.
All right.
I hear that. So what will be the will and pleasure of this committee?
Well, I could see where the meeting that was held, maybe they can invite parties from all stakeholders to a meeting and have that discussion. And they may, even if this Johns Island community group would say, hey, leave well enough alone. Or as a result of that discussion, again, there may be a way we can tweak it and make it better. But again, you move forward together as opposed to, I could see the folk at the county saying, where is this coming from? Okay. Not being a party as to why. So I just like on this one, this worked so well. I just like the idea. How many things we have in a comprehensive way with multiple jurisdictions that has not been penetrated in almost not one time in 25 years. So let's include them. It's worked well.
Councilman Pell, then we go back to Jackson, then we'll end this discussion, I guess.
Thank you, Chairman. And I haven't chimed in yet because I think I used up all my words on the parking discussion. But, you know, I think the urban growth boundary concept is a wonderful planning tool, and it's a mechanism. But I think that there's a sense, at least on Johns Island, you know, if you live out there, if you're a stakeholder out there, you look at a lot of this development and you think to yourself, you know, there's a disconnect because there's a sense that sprawl and overdevelopment has taken over out on those islands. And I do agree with Councilman Waring that that's not necessarily an urban growth boundary problem. That's a zoning issue that we need to look at as part of our comprehensive plan, some of these other things. But I do think that as a planning tool and in the interests of maintaining clear lines of communication, collaboration between all these various stakeholders, maybe, you know, short of, one other option perhaps we can look at is maybe establishing an urban growth boundary commission or something with representatives from each of these various entities along the lines that Councilman Waring mentioned, and just use that as an opportunity to, you know, make sure everybody's working together, flying in together, building on all the successes over the last couple decades, instilling in the public and a recognition that this urban growth boundary is not just a line on a map, it's a living, breathing, collaborative process between stakeholders. Because at the end of the day, there's no line on a map that's going to stop bad land use planning and development. right? Anything that is done can be undone. There's nothing permanent in this line of work. We can zone, we can up zone, we can down zone. You know, we can change all that. The best thing we can do is just remain engaged on this issue, maintain collaborative lines of communication, and instill in the public, especially out on Johns Island, confidence in what we're doing. So I think this is a good idea. I think something the discussion should continue, but just do it in a way that makes the most sense for all the different stakeholders involved.
Okay, Councilman Jackson, then we'll just go on and just.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chairman. I was going to just speak to your question about what we should do right now. I would agree, and Appel just said it, that we keep this as an open item and explain to the task force who's put it forward to the city that we do need them to at least tell us about the homework that they've done that has led them to this place of wanting this to be a more formalized set of documents and agreements. And you know, I don't perceive that this group is without counsel and has not done any research about any of this. So maybe it's just to give them an opportunity to come back with something more concrete or more holistic, as Councilmember Waring was suggesting. I do think there is comfort in the different players that need to sign off on any development, but it has not worked. And there are examples now. The beach company has a huge PUD down on the Kiowa River that is way outside the UGB. And there's some, you know, like special reason why that occurred. And maybe Mr. Morgan knows all about that, but it feels like a big violation to the people who live on that part of Johns Island. And so that's probably the worst case representative of what they're all worried about.
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment on where Kiowa and Seabrook Island is. That particular area where the beach company is going down, that's not even part of this particular area with the urban growth boundaries down there along Bohicket Road. And
it is on Johns Island, sir. It's not on Kiowa. It's on the Kiowa, the Johns Island side of.
Yeah, I know it's Johns Island. I know Johns Island pretty well. You know, like I said, even in the 50s, a lot of people don't even know about Johns Island. They talk a lot about Johns Island, but Johns Island was not the way it is now. Everyone who is talking about the problem on Johns Island, they move on Johns Island and cause the problems. So that's what I'm saying. I went there when it was dirt roads. It was not but dirt roads on Johns Island, but all the development happened on Johns Island now. And now, since they move in Johns Island and bring all the developments on Johns Island, now they don't want it anymore. And that's what happened when they came before us, and they was talking a lot of things that kind of got next to me, you know, because of that on Johns Island. In fact, my family's still on Johns Island. They're still there on Bohicket Road, River Road, and all back in Blanding Drive and all those just particular areas. And like I said, my family been there over 350 years on Johns Island. They're still there. And the farmland we're talking about is gone because of the development that happened on Johns Island. They have destroyed all of it, all of the rural areas so far as the farmlands and things like that. And so the only farmland that my cousins still own there is the Freeman Farm there. And you have the couple of other farms still on River Road that's there. But most of these rural areas, like farming, is just about gone from Johns Island because of the development that's happening on Johns Island. And so it has changed. It's changed big time. So even with the change, smart growth, we have to make sure smart growth and keep on going. And that's the classes that we attend with smart growth, because it's going to change. It's not going to be the way it was back when I was coming up and back when some of us was coming up. It had changed. And so people are fighting. I mean, they fought even me about it. You know, they knocked me a lot because of what I was talking about on Johns Island, the way Johns Island was, and they're talking about the farmland. They're not talking about the farmland because it's gone. You know, most of the rural part of the area is gone. You know, when they build a Kiowa on Seabrook Island there, it's gone. So we have to move on, and we have to make sure that everybody's working together.
Mr. Chairman.
And I'm going to let Councilman Gregory speak, and then I'm going to just stop with that.
Point of clarification here. I just want to be clear. Are we suggesting that the beach company has breached the boundary?
No,
I don't know.
That didn't happen.
Oh, I don't think it did. And I think that's the example that was used. I just think we have to be very careful
I don't know.
Okay.
But we'll take this as information, and you're going to get together and probably try to have a meeting with the task force out there, I believe. Mr. McQueenie, whomever's going to do it, and have a meeting with all the stakeholders pertaining to the Johns Island urban growth boundary. If they can get together and try to work with them to see what they can come up with, and make sure everybody's on the same page. If they have to come up with some kind of resolution or whatever the case may be, then we can go from that point. I believe that's
just FYI. I think that property, as a matter of fact, it shows you it worked. The beach company tried to get water and sewer from St. John's Water Commission and CPW, and because of the boundary, were refused. They had to apply to DHEC for their own separate water and sewer commission out there. And it has been decades in trying to get that done. And I think, I may not be correct on this, but check, it may be a part of a town of Kiowa. So when it came to getting services from Charleston County or the city of Charleston, it was unequivocally no. So in that regard, it worked. So that's an example of it being successful. But check that piece on me to see whether that property, I actually think it's part of the town of Kiowa. And again, they had to go through expensive measures of developing their own water and sewer infrastructure out there. They could not get it from the stakeholders of this agreement.
So, Mr. McQueenie or Mr. Morgan, you are going to get with the task force from Johns Island and try to see if we could bring these stakeholders together.
We can relay that and suggest that we get a meeting of the stakeholders together. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and bring it with the task force from Johns Island and try to see how we can kind of really dissolve this situation. Okay.
Yeah, as a member, just for the record, I haven't answered any questions about it, but I do have a conflict on the beach company's development down there. Yeah, I'm intentionally not saying anything about it.
Yeah, we're not going that way.
Okay.
We're not going there. So that would be the next, issue. And then we'll have to come back to this committee once you all have gotten that information and have met with the task force. Then you bring it back to this committee, and then we'll go from that point.
We can certainly do that. Yes, sir. Yes, okay, sir.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll go from that point. So if no one have any other things to bring before this committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right.